Jack Logic Live. I'm your host, Neil Johnson. Always excited to be with you and to share the news with you folks. Really enjoying my time out here at Turning Point USA, the AmFest. It's a fantastic event. Met the folks from Gun Owners of America and signed up because, I'm a gun owner. I live in America and we need to protect the Second Amendment, folks. But going on in Minnesota, we have more fraud charges dropping. It seems every day. I'm going to cover three recent stories here out of Minnesota in this. One is large-scale voting fraud. The other is this fraud fraud so big that it's a whole industry of tourism. It's pretty wild. And then also Keith Ellison, pretty amazing stuff there as well. But do me a favor, please smash that like. Do chat in with where you're from. Always good to see you on stream here. I've got Michigan in the house, Arkansas in the house. We'll see who else joins the stream as well. But yeah, please do smash that like and chat in. And do go check out my sponsor, MyPillow, mypillow.com/lumberjack. Okay. And call 1-800-568-2865 to get the best deals on the best sleep products available. All right. Texas, Boise, Idaho, Georgia, Illinois. Unfortunately, they say. Well, unfortunately, I live in Minnesota, folks. But let's get this. Dustin Grage has an exclusive. He posted on X. This was just today. We have uncovered records outlining an organized voter fraud scheme in the Somali community here in Minnesota. Folks, I want you to know that they're adding a lot to Minnesota, that they actually built Minnesota. Ilan Omar told us that. In spite of all this fraud, I just want you to understand it's only a handful of them. There was hardly anybody involved in it. The 60 indictments that they have, but that was just feeding our future. So that didn't even address this. Wait. I'll go on. The county prosecutor actually declined to charge this case. But Dustin says the Trump administration needs to pick it up because here's what happened. A Sherburne County election investigation documents a close operational relationship between St. Cloud City Council candidate Huda Omar Ibrahim and Tajir Rage. Last name like Rage, he's got to be a peaceful dude. An individual repeatedly identified by election officials as bringing groups of voters to polling locations while acting as an interpreter. Election staff observed campaign materials for Huda outside the Sherburne County Government Center, ballots marked only in her race, and consistent voting activity tied to Rage's presence. Investigators emphasized that these concerns were identified internally by election officials during routine election administration and ballot review, not raised by political opponents after the fact. So again, just to make sure you're hearing what I'm saying here, this is not political parties doing this. Carrie Bobbis, thank you so much for that super sticker. Merry Christmas to you as well. But it was not done by partisans. It was not done ex post facto. This was happening while the election was going on. It was happening by election workers. They were the ones notifying of these irregularities, of these discrepancies, election workers who were trained to spot these things, okay? According to sworn interviews conducted as part of the investigation, election officials raised multiple red flags connected to this activity. These included organized group voting, voters who did not appear to match their identification, and proof of residency documents that, while technically compliant, raised credibility concerns. Now, I want to tell you something. In Minnesota, these technically compliant documents, all you need, folks, is a utility bill. Like that can suffice. You can register same day in Minnesota, just bring in a utility bill, or you just bring in somebody to vouch for you. So let's say, for example, that who's out there in the chat? Kronos, I don't know where Kronos lives, 9860. All right, so Kronos 9860, longtime listener to the channel. Kronos, if you were up here in Minnesota, I could just bring you down to the vote center and I could say, oh yeah, you live in New York? Well, today you live in Minnesota. Yeah. Oh, this is my friend Kronos, lives in Minnesota. Oh, here's a ballot, Kronos. You're good to go. And I'm not kidding. that is not a stretch, okay? I've actually been an election judge in Minnesota. If they have somebody to vouch for them, or they have an electric bill. So let's just say, for example, um, they create a fake document with an electric bill that says that they live at 1234 8th Street in St. Cloud, Minnesota. That's where they live. Okay. You do not need to show an ID. That doesn't need to happen here in Minnesota because, I mean, you need an ID for every unimportant activity in life, but heaven forbid you should have one for casting a vote, which determines the future of our country and, is actually more. I would state this much, folks. Your ability to vote has more consequence than you having a knife that could commit a crime. I mean, the absurdity of saying that you shouldn't provide an ID to vote is just pathetic. But anyways, let's go down. We'll keep reading. Officials specifically noted repeated use of lease agreements listing numerous common names and similar birth dates, many beginning with January 1st. Everybody was born on January 1st and their names were all Muhammad. Can you imagine? Folks, if you don't know anything about Muslim names, they typically go by their second name because the first names are always Muhammad. Okay, so like I used to have, they were going to college and I had these renters of a basement apartment and it was Muhammad Shabir, Muhammad Tofile, Muhammad, they were all Muhammad. Like every single one of them was named Muhammad. So you just take in a bunch of people, you say, hey, I'm Muhammad Shabir, or I'm just Muhammad, because you can just get by with the first name. So I'm Muhammad Khan, okay? I was born on January 1st, and here's a lease agreement, okay? Now you can obviously just make a lease agreement up. So the whole thing, our system is designed to fail us. By the way, I'm gonna come right back to this, but I wanna make note of another thing. I don't know if you guys all heard, I shared some of the Georgia testimony last week, but just the other day, Georgia's state election board hearing, they admitted that Fulton County violated the rules and that 315,000 early votes, okay, without poll worker signatures in 2020. Trump said this had happened. And then do you remember all the Republicans who ran to denounce him? And by the way, another piece of note on the Georgia thing, Brad Raffensperger, I should note, let me go back to this real quick. I want to get to Brad Raffensperger here. He has joined with the blue states to oppose Trump. I mean, you can't even, right? I mean, you guys all thought Brad Raffensperger was a good guy, probably the greatest Secretary of State in the nation, true conservative, a real Republican, I'm telling you. I mean, yeah, Republicans in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee are all working with the Trump administration to secure the elections, right? And provide them information on the voter rolls. The Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, is teaming up with liberals in Illinois, Wisconsin, and D.C. to fight against Trump and the efforts to secure the elections, okay? So what exactly is going on in Georgia? What are they hiding down there? But let's get, back to Minnesota. And by the way, folks, if you don't think that Tim Walz right now is in absolute spiral out of control mode, you are wrong. He is freaking out. He is, every day he's posting some other freak out session. He's going berserk. Ilhan and Omar is too. They're both trying to cover their butts, both trying to deflect. So now Tim Walz's new thing is talking about signing executive orders against the Second Amendment because he's trying to distract and get the news to cover something else. I'm not covering his executive orders. I mean, they're dumb. They actually don't do too much, and they're not going to pass any scrutiny. He can create all the committees he wants. He can do all these things he wants. We have a Second Amendment. Right to infringe shall not be, or right to bear arms shall not be infringed, and that's what's going on. So don't get distracted by all of Tim Walz's other things. Focus on the fraud, and the stories you need to share right now are the fraud stories. And the obvious it's completely ridiculous for him to go on and say he didn't know this was happening when you grow from, I've covered it time and time again, but $1.8 million to $288 million in 7 years in the autism fraud case. Okay, this is not, you don't see that happening in programs and go, oh yeah, that's normal. I mean, no governor is that stupid. This is too stupid to be stupid. Does that make sense to y'all? Do you get what I mean? It's too stupid to be stupid, meaning obviously there's a plan behind it, and obviously people know what's going on, and they actually want this to happen, okay? Anyways, back to voter fraud. There's so much fraud to talk about, folks, okay? Let's see. Here we go. Election staff also estimated that Rage may have brought in more than 100 voters and expressed concern that many of those voters were not fully advised of the oath they were signing, raising questions about whether voters understood what they were certifying under penalty of law. The investigation further documented a confirmed instance of double voting involving a voter associated with Rage, which constitutes a felony under Minnesota law. Although prosecutors ultimately declined to file charges because they didn't believe they could prove it in a court of law. Now, understand, these prosecutors is at the county level, but our chief prosecutor in the state of Minnesota is a guy by the name of Keith Ellison. That's our AG. I'm going to get to him in just a second here. But this is leaving a lot of obvious questions about the systemic weaknesses in Minnesota's voting laws, their voting systems, all of it. I mean, it is amazing how easy it is to vote in Minnesota. And I'm saying this as a resident of Minnesota and also as an election judge. Additional interactions documented by law enforcement reinforced the concerns. In one instance, a Somali woman who arrived in a van approached a deputy on foot and attempted to provide a Minnesota driver's license while Tajir Rage was present. The woman did not appear to speak English and repeatedly stated the city Melrose. Okay? Now, obviously, she would not be able to vote in a city council race if she lived in Melrose at that point. A Minnesota city, that's a full hour away from where the city council race was taking place. During the exchange, Rage spoke to the woman in Somali, after which she returned to the van. The deputy documented the interaction as raising residency concerns and included it as part of a broader evidence suggesting individuals may have been brought into the area to vote in a race for which they were not eligible to vote. Okay? In other documented interaction, an investigator reported that after parting ways in a government center hallway, Podi, another Somali candidate on the ballot, called out and asked him to return. Okay, it just goes on, all this stuff. So this took place in Sherburne County, okay? And they tell us this stuff doesn't happen, folks. But let me ask you a question. So here's Keith Ellison's post today, and there's a whole video. I won't put you through the pain of watching the video because it's him to boxing music, acting like he's a fighter. The text of the tweet, though, was this. Scammers thought Minnesotans were easy targets. They were wrong. And then he goes, from student loan scams to fake utility callers, we shut them down this year fast. He's not even addressing the real scams, the scams that are bilking us out $1 billion. He's talking about these student loan scams and fake utility callers, okay? Sure, we don't want any scams. But remember Keith Ellison, the guy who's talking about being such a tough fighter, was the very guy who was in the office talking to the Somali people and saying, hey, yeah, you know what? We don't see any, Governor Walz and I, we're eye to eye on this. We this piddly stuff, we don't need to prosecute this. Problem is the piddly stuff added up to over $8 billion, apparently. Yeah. And he's going after Menards for running a rebate at 11% on his store credit. Do any of you out there, let me ask you this question. Do any of you care? I always knew if I went to Menards, the 11% rebate was a store credit. I had to go back and use that money at Menards. Let me seriously ask this question, because there's all this fraud going on, and Keith Ellison saying this is the big fraud, the 11% rebate. That's the big scam. How many of you are concerned about the Menards 11% rebate? Seriously, does this enter any of your minds? Because I am totally unconcerned about it. I know it's in the thing, 11% off, and you get a rebate, and then you go spend it back at Menards on other home improvement goods. I'm not a big Menards fan after COVID, okay? I don't really use their store much anymore because they went so totalitarian. But is anybody concerned about this? Okay, anybody? Is anybody concerned about Menards? Is that what's on your mind when we've got $8 billion? In fact, the Joe Thompson, the first assistant U.S. attorney for Minnesota, stated this, okay? He said, the fraud is not small. It isn't isolated. The magnitude cannot be overstated. It's staggering, industrial scale fraud. It's swamping Minnesota and calling into question everything we know about our state. That's from Joe Thompson, first assistant U.S. attorney for Minnesota. And this is where it gets really interesting because they hid this fraud for how long, okay? And yet we're supposed to believe that industrial scale voter fraud never happened and that's unprovable, okay? Somebody said Menards is not a tax-funded business. I'm worried about my tax money. Exactly. I don't think anybody's that concerned about Menards running 11% rebates, okay? I talked briefly about this yesterday, but I want to talk just a little bit more about this. The feds are actually bringing new charges regarding what I spoke about the other day. And they bring new charges. This is out of NPR. I like going to NPR. But feds bring new charges tied to staggering Minnesota Medicaid fraud. Okay? Staggering industrial scale Medicaid fraud. It's likely to reach into the billions of dollars. Okay? The newest indictments, so there's new indictments, allege that defendants built a Medicaid-funded housing stabilization services program operating in Minnesota. So we had heard about the Minnesota housing stabilization services, but now there are new indictments being brought. So the feds, the Department of Justice, is actually doing something about this. These are services that weren't even performed. It wasn't just overbilling. Hey, Menards still carries my pillow. Well, you know what? So let's give Menards some credit for that. Thank you for pointing that out to me. You're right. I haven't been in their stores for so long, but I think I did stop in there maybe a year ago or something. I had to pick something up, and I was in a town that had a Menards. Yeah, it was actually, I had to pick something up for my son. It was a specific product he wanted from Menards. And I picked it up for him. And yeah, they still do carry my pillow. So kudos to Menards for that. I didn't like their reaction to COVID. Okay. Another set of indictments accuses two men from Philadelphia of committing what Joe Thompson called fraud tourism, creating two companies. They created two companies that submitted $3.5 million in fraudulent Medicaid claims for non-existing housing support services in Minnesota. So the fraud was so good in Minnesota, the atmosphere was so ripe for this fraud that they just decided that they would start fake businesses in Minnesota because apparently it was easier to commit fraud in Minnesota than Pennsylvania. I mean, I would say it's unbelievable, but it is believable because it's Tim Walz and it's Keith Ellison and it's, I mean, Steve Simon's our Secretary of State. I mean, talk about a chance for industrial scale voter fraud. Thompson said the pair dropped into Minnesota because they heard the program was easy money. Yep. Separately, Thompson said another defendant had been charged in a scheme to defraud a federally funded program intended to help children with autism. So now they're finally indicting people in the autism awareness fraud scheme, okay? Tallying more than $6 million in fraud there. Thompson suggested that the fraud might have siphoned at least half of the $18 billion spent in Minnesota since 2018 in the 14 Medicaid programs viewed as high risk for abuse. although the dollar amounts tied to prosecution so far are closer to 300 million. But half of 18 billion would be $9 billion, folks. He said the scale of what's been seen there isn't happening in any other state. So we know there's fraud happening all over. We saw actually some stories out of Maine, Ohio, actually tied to the Somali communities there. We saw that fraud. I will guarantee you Michigan's got more fraud than we're seeing right now. Georgia with all the election fraud, and then this story recently here of Brad Raffensperger, complete denial of the fraud. It's other places as well, but Minnesota, we seem to have a handle on this. Folks, if you wanna know how to do fraud right, Minnesota's the place for you. Apparently, it's easy money. Anyhow, folks, that's what's going on there. But it's nuts. It's nuts. But if you folks get a chance, go check out what's going on in Lindell TV. It's live coverage from the event, AmFest. There's a lot of great speakers there if you haven't seen what's going on. But, and, you know, there's a lot of resolving issues within the fractions and the factions of the Republican Party right now and the conservative movement. So, again, I always tell people, because I've had a lot of people approach me with issues they have with such and such or so and so or this organization or that organization, and I've always told them, just stay in your lane, report what you know to be true, if that's what you're doing, comment on the things that you firmly believe in, and don't worry about the rest, because not everybody's are you folks concerned about what influencer doesn't like what influencer, or, you know, I don't know, what do they call that, you know, in the administration gossip, or within the movement gossip. I'm just so unconcerned about that stuff. I'm very concerned about fraud in Minnesota. I'm very concerned about registering voters. I'm very concerned about election fraud, okay? We just, you know, sitting there having these internal feuds and saying so-and-so is bad. There's plenty of people I don't listen to. Like, I mean, even at the Turning Point Conference, I mean, there's speakers. I'm just like, I'm just not interested in what they have to say. But I don't need to go broadcast it to the world and go freak out about it and make whole shows trying to expose them. It's dumb. It's dumb. That's all I'll say. Anyways, keep fighting the good fight, folks. All right? And we got to win. We have to win because the country's at stake. If we lose, you are dealing with a seriously emboldened left right now. And they're whacked. They're whacked out of their mind. All right? Remember, go check out MyPillow, mypillow.com/lumberjack. Big savings, best sleep products available. The Christmas specials are still going on over there. And we'll see you on the next episode, all right? Love you all. Peace out.